Hello, and welcome to Telco Bits and Bytes Live, a series of short conversations where we aim to capture the stories of the day through the lens of a CSP. I'm Yuval Zuckerman, Senior Manager for Partner Marketing in the Service Provider and Edge Business Unit at VMware. In this session, we will take a look at the new partnership between VMware and Arrcus and the potential it holds in helping service providers modernize their networks to more effectively compete in a cloud economy. I'm joined today by Arrcus CEO Shekar Ayyar and by Stephen Spellicy, Vice President, Service Provider Marketing, Sales Readiness, and Business Development at VMware. Shekar, I'll start with you. We recently announced our partnership at MWC for those who are not familiar with Arrcus. Can you tell us more about the company and some of your recent successes?
Yeah, thank you, Yuval, and hi, Stephen. Sometimes I can't figure out whether I'm just sort of still part of VMware or I'm doing something different. Given the extent of time I spent there, it's actually hard to separate myself from the company. We announced a pretty critical partnership together between Arrcus and VMware in MWC, as you mentioned. Arrcus, for those that aren't familiar with the company, we are essentially a software hyperscale networking company. Think about Arrcus as being able to take a router or a switch, decompose it into industry standard infrastructure hardware, and then the Arrcus software on top of it does the routing stack and the switching stack. So this has been tremendously powerful as people are now starting to move into much more programmable software-defined networking paradigms. And when you look at what we do, there are a lot of parallels in many ways to how VMware reinvented what was happening in the compute infrastructure to what we are doing for switching and routing in data centers and telecom environments.
What are the challenges?
By the way, sorry, Yuval, I just want to quickly talk about the customer successes since you had asked about that, which is if you look at what Arrcus is doing, we're doing something pretty significant with customers like SoftBank, like Liberty Global. Many of these are very large-scale telecom providers. Now, clearly, the process of how these things get tested, deployed, etc. They're long cycles, but we are very well engaged with all of them in terms of what we are doing with these customers. And we'll get into a bit more depth about the use cases, but we're fascinated by what large-scale leading telecom service providers globally are starting to see as benefits of working with Arrcus and an architecture like what Arrcus brings to the table.
Thank you. What are the challenges introduced to service providers' networks in a multi-cloud 5G-driven world as you see them today, Shekar?
Yeah, so I actually see some very critical trends that are happening now. So first of all, the transition from 4G to 5G is well underway. So we've got a lot of carriers globally. I mean, a lot of people are scratching their heads on, oh, what are the use cases? How are they going to monetize? But the fact is that the infrastructure is being moved from 4G to 5G, and it's going to happen globally over some period of time. The second is that cloud is no longer a single big one blob cloud. It's moving a lot to, first of all, multi-cloud networks. So there are many clouds that are offering services. And so customers are starting to say, okay, how do I consume from these multiple clouds? And the third, I would say, is edge computing. So once again, from consolidated data centers, things are moving more to the periphery and more to endpoints. Now, the reason these three trends are important is that a lot of the network infrastructure and networking infrastructure that people have deployed into their central offices, data centers, base stations, etc., these are all gear that were historically built before these trends came into making. And so carriers and service providers will find it hard to have to adapt to these new trends and become agile in creating and deploying new service provision or services unless they look at their transport network or their infrastructure for networking as a programmable fabric that they can go and create and deploy new services on top of. So this, I think, is a fundamental issue that is facing carriers as they are trying to move from last generation's technology to the next generation of applications.
Thank you. And given that situation, how are VMware and Arrcus working together to solve this challenge?
Sure. Stephen, you want to take that? You want me to?
Yeah, of course. What we do within VMware, we focus on the telecom industry. Obviously, we have a horizontal platform which enables network operators to modernize their infrastructure as well as monetize it. What we announced around VMworld, we announced around MWC Barcelona 2022 in February, was our partnership with Arrcus, specifically related to the ability to run their workloads on top of our platform. The operators use our platform to make their operations better, rebuild their infrastructure, make it more modern and agile, so it's more efficient, it's more energy, friendly, regarding the footprint, et cetera. And when you have programmability through workloads like Arrcus's ACE platform, you can actually start to engineer the traffic and steer the traffic to specific areas, optimize the traffic to be able to make better use of that resource. So we announced that in combination with a demo that we showcased at MWC Barcelona, featuring actually some use cases from SoftBank. Very exciting demo and great dialogue and discussion in our booths as well. But this is today what we're doing with Arrcus is continuing to work together and integrate using our platform as a star workload, really, to accelerate the use of multi-cloud networking.
Yeah, if I might add to that, Yuval, I think use cases like mobile edge computing or multi-access edge computing are they provide platforms for the telecom service providers to create very well differentiated new network services as well as application services that they can then deploy to the enterprise. When you couple this with programmable 5G, if you will, the ability to bring in like multi-cloud networking into the MEC, you can see how together we are bringing capability to global service providers really across the globe in terms of how they can now monetize a net new set of services. Historically, service providers have been probably content with saying, look, we're just going to partner with one hyperscaler and that's going to be our service. But if you now start thinking about the telco cloud from VMware, which is this really well architected platform for creation and deployment of services, and then if you layer on top of that Arrcus's ACE, and we go to a service provider and to show them how this combination can enable them to bring multi-cloud networking to enterprises with, for example, the different clouds really providing their services at the back end of this. This is completely turning the model around in terms of what telecom operators can do. Now, we've been working as well from Arrcus with cloud providers. We just recently did an announcement with CoreSite as an example on how this sort of MCN service can work, or how it can actually provide agile deployment of new services. So I'm super excited about how we can go to carriers and then offer them and show them the path, not just to better technology, but better technology that can be useful in creating monetizable services as they try to recoup their investments in 5G.
Thank you. More specifically about the mobile side of the network and slicing, how can customers leverage this joint capability?
Yeah, so I'll start and then Stephen, feel free to jump in, which is we've got the ability now. Let me actually step back. So if you think about what is happening in the carrier network and mobility, um, with the way with NFV, for example, network functions virtualization, as we had seen from VMware, a lot of the core functions are now operating in a virtual mode on top of infrastructure like VMware's telco cloud. If you then go to the radio access network, there's a lot of work being done in RAN for that disaggregation. And so that's now being decomposed into whatever the splits and then enabling ORAN, for example, again, on infrastructure like VMware's telco cloud. What has not been touched in the process is the transport network. So if you think about what happens on top of the rack, there's a top of rack switch, or in the provider edge router, or even in your core chassis router. Now, the reason that that is a problem is because when you want to implement something like a network slice on top of this architecture and infrastructure, you have part of that network virtualized, but then you hit a switch or a router and it doesn't actually know what language you're talking or how you're be able to communicate that slice from one side of your mobile network to the other side, which is your World Wide Web or your IP network. And that's where our technology comes in. So Arrcus's ACE, for example, helps translate GTP into IP. This allows a lot of the IP functions and the applications that you can create to work as though nothing had changed. So the mobility infrastructure is now merged in some ways with the IP infrastructure. And this just completely changes the framework for how you create, deploy, manage, automate applications at low cost economically, and do that in a way in which it effectively becomes more of a brownfield architecture for moving to 5G as opposed to rip and replace. Stephen, and let me have you add to that. So.
Yeah, obviously, speeding the time to deployment is critical. When we talk to customers, I'll give an example. O2, for instance, we announced a major project with them around the Barcelona show as well. And, there's a tremendous amount of excitement around modernizing the infrastructure in order to be able to build out 5G networks. But you're right, you're spanning the legacy to the future network. It's a big investment, right? You don't build networks just for the sake of building them. You don't modernize for the sake of modernizing. You build so you can actually go out and monetize it. The fact of the matter is we instrument intelligence at the edge using technology like Arrcus's ACE. We have the ability to engineer where that traffic will go and how you make more precise use of that network. Also, to Shekar's point, the simplification of the user plane function into the traditional IP network. That's a huge value add for operators who are looking to reduce the complexity as they build out these networks. We time is our enemy. Right? Cost is our enemy. We need to be able to reduce costs, and we need to shorten the time to actual productivity. And when we have technologies like Arrcus and VMware working together, we're bringing together simple solutions that are IT friendly for the most part. They're not, rocket science in many ways as far as deployment goes. It's a great 1+1 solution that creates huge amounts of value for the operator. At the same time, it gives them so much finite control as to how they route traffic throughout that network.
Yeah, one of the things maybe I'll just add to the routing point. So Arrcus, as you might know, the origins came from building a routing stack. And increasingly what we're finding is that routing becomes more and more important as people are starting to now deploy networks that are essentially IP-based, connecting with the mobile network. There are a number of examples of what kinds of services and functions that can be created. I mean, we talked about slicing, we talked about things like multi-cloud networking, but there's a whole host of things like functionality related to security, as an example, that many of us have not even yet scratched the surface in terms of what can be done and how that can get deployed in the context of our joint solution. But the fact that we can together go to the market and effectively have a push button capability for service providers to deploy infrastructure that can then open up the ability for them to offer, I don't know, maybe 3, 4, or maybe 10 to 20 different new services that they can monetize through this approach of how people are making investments in 5G. And alongside that, that to me is the critical key in terms of why service providers are going to be fascinated by this solution.
I know you guys were involved, Shekar, with SRv6. Can you tell us how that engagement can be helpful for carriers?
Yeah, so for those that don't know, SRv6 is essentially segment routing v6. And one of the things that is happening, and in fact, SoftBank demonstrated this at Mobile World Congress. One of the things that's happening is carriers are starting to understand how some of the agility, programmability, and flexibility of the cloud architecture can be brought in to benefit the mobile infrastructure. As I had explained earlier, these two pools of capacity and infrastructure were historically kept separate, whereas now you can start seeing these things come together and come together in a way in which applications that have been built for IP networks now can make themselves available to what is happening on the mobility side. So one of the key technologies that is enabling that to happen is SRv6. And as a result of SRv6 capability, there is, I mean, effectively on a technical level, you can think about this as some extra information that is coded on the packets and bit streams that allows you to start doing more intelligent routing or packet forwarding. If you now say my mobile network is SRv6 capable, which is where Arrcus comes in, is to make that mobile network SRv6 capable through our routing functionality, then you can do things like intelligent routing for the mobile network. So you can start saying, okay, these are packets that have been tagged and they belong to a certain slice, and therefore this is the route they need to follow. As I mentioned briefly, you can then also take this a different level into security applications. You can start saying, look, we can actually now start inspecting the routes of these packets, the origins of those routes. We can then detect where they are coming from as opposed to where they say they're coming from. And then using information like that, we can then build applications that are whatever, either prevention of denial of service attacks, or how do you remediate something when an attack begins. So there is a whole host of network-related functions, functionality, and applications that can then get exposed, if you will, at the northbound level when you start deploying solutions that are, or technology that is SRv6 capable. So like I said, we are just beginning to scratch the surface of what is possible in that domain, but it is extremely exciting to see, I mean, all of us jumping in to help make this a much more standardized and adopted technology, as well as to bring, I would say, a number of the cloud-like benefits to mobile networks without sacrificing things like quality, reliability, and security.
What I think is fascinating about what we're doing with Arrcus and how their technology is being applied to solve these problems is, as our customers move towards cloud native and edge native related architectures, the applications themselves, or they function as an autonomous system. The applications themselves, the parts of the application that make up the actual experience, they're effectively deployed all over the place, right? They could be a back end in one cloud provider, it could be a front end that's sitting in an edge data center, it could be a middle, sort of logic layer that's sitting in another data center. Maybe it's a traditional on-prem data center. The fact of the matter is you need intelligence in the network to be able to get the packets to where they need to be efficiently, securely. This technology is enabling operators to be able to do that, so that experience, the user experience of whatever app we're talking about, is seamless. That's the magic. That is the rocket science underneath. The fact of the matter is operators can put these two parts together and get up and running and solve some of these challenges right now. There's nothing inhibiting a customer out there to take VMware's telco cloud platform and layer on top the Arrcus technology and to make that work at scale. So that's what, to me, is very exciting. We're solving big problems and challenges and creating new opportunities working together. And we're also meeting the challenges the modern architecture is emerging as a standard for our customers.
I mean, the other aspect to add to that is just the immense amount of programmability that we collectively make available. Because both our technologies have been built in a very service-oriented way. All of this is essentially accessible through APIs, and you can make API calls to our infrastructures and then create services and functions. The reason that is exciting is because this is not the world that comms operators have lived in. Okay, they have historically been in this world of you take a box, you put that box into the network, you wire it up, and then it keeps ticking for 200 years, delivering a voice call, and nobody touches it, right? I mean, that's sort of the world of telco. The world of cloud was completely the opposite. It was like chaos. You kind of throw anything at it, and everything kind of gets composed. It gets pulled together. You can create applications. You can build marketplaces. And so now you can see that you are bringing that world in some form of organized chaos into the telecom operator world, but in a good way, where you can now go in and say, look, you really don't need to wait for 6 years to launch a new messaging service. You can do that, I don't know, maybe overnight, maybe too much of a pipe dream, but at least in a few weeks, you can get something up and running as a new service because the infrastructure is now programmable. And it's because of software like the ones you get from Arrcus and VMware.
Oh, that's fantastic, and it's amazing to learn about such innovations. For those who are out there, if you would like to learn more about VMware solutions with Arrcus, feel free to reach out to me or to either one of my guests today. Shekar, thank you so much for joining us. Stephen, as always, again, thank you. And to all of our viewers today, thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's wonderful seeing you, and look forward to staying in touch with all of you out there, either now or whenever you view this broadcast.
Thank you.
Likewise. Great session. Thank you, Shekar, and thank you, Yuval.